Hello, everyone. Welcome to video 4 of Chapter 1, Section 1, where we are going to expand on the previous Hello World example in order to illustrate the framework aspect of GitHub Actions. So if you recall from the previous example, we had created a repository called Hello World Example. I'm in that repository right now. I'm going to utilize the same repository for this example. If you're following along, you could do the same, but you could also use any repository you like as long as you place the workflow under .github/workflows, the workflow will run. So previously we had created a hello world workflow that simply printed to the console hello world. And that was to illustrate automation in GitHub Actions. Here, we're going to expand on this in order to illustrate the rich framework that GitHub Actions provides for us to create workflows. If we think back to the previous video, I talked about how the framework of GitHub Actions was all about the YAML syntax, which gives us the ability to write our workflow automation. I also talked about a rich GitHub community. This gives us numerous ready-to-go actions that are open source that we can utilize, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel in a lot of our workflows. We're going to use that here. And then that third part was really all about the GUI that GitHub Actions provides. So this is mainly here in the action section where we can get a list of all the workflows that have ran and been triggered, as well as a console view to help us troubleshoot. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump right into the GitHub code editor, the web editor, which we can do by switching this from .com to .dev. So let's do that. Once that opens up, we are gonna switch to a brand new branch. So we are not coding directly in the main branch. So the way we are going to expand on the hello world example here is instead of simply printing to the console hello world, we're gonna add an extra step so that it comments directly on the PR hello world. So we're gonna call this new branch hello world comment PR, since that kind of explains what the workflow is all about. So create a new branch, switch to the new branch. Once we're in the new branch, we have the option to expand directly on the previous Hello World workflow we wrote, since it is an expansion of that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new workflow file, and that is simply so we have a reference to both examples once we're done. So I'm going to come here. I'm going to say new file. I'm going to say hello world comment pr.yaml. And then I'm going to copy the code from the previous hello world over to the new work file. All right, so I'm just going to mention here, there may be some topics or parts of this example that may go over your head because we haven't really talked about the syntax and we haven't really defined a lot of the different terminology for actions yet. That's coming in a following video, so bear with me. This example is really about giving you a broad overview of the GitHub Actions framework and the power that it has or it gives us to automate GitHub Action workflows. So if there's things that are not super clear right now, bear with me. It will make sense in a following video once we explain all the terminology. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing is I'm going to rename the workflow to comment PR. So hello world comment PR. And the reason I'm going to do this is because in the GUI, whenever a workflow runs, this is how you can reference which workflow ran. And if they're the same, we're going to get confused. So we're going to update the name there so that we don't get confused as to which run belongs to which workflow. The triggers, which are what triggers the workflow, we're going to keep the same. It's going to trigger whenever we push to the main branch or whenever we create a pull request against the main branch or push to a pull request that's against the main branch. And where we're going to make updates, it's in the job section. We're going to keep one job. It's going to be the hello world job, but we're going to add a second step. And what the second step is going to do, it's just going to comment on the PR. There's a couple ways we can comment on the PR. Maybe the one that comes to mind to anyone right away if they're working with GitHub is to call the GitHub API and tell it, comment on this PR. That would be one way to do it. We could write our own code to do that. So we could write our own code. Maybe we could use some bash and make it pull requests. to the GitHub API and say, comment on this particular PR. That would be one way to do things. But what we actually want to do here is we want to utilize the GitHub Actions community. In the GitHub Actions community, there are many ready to go actions we can utilize. So anytime you're doing something that seems could have already been done, it's always good to do a search to see if there's a well-used community action that you can utilize so you don't have to rewrite the code yourself. And that is the case when it comes to commenting on a pull request. There is community action, the Peter Evans/creator update comment. That's what the action is called. So it's a well-used action. It has a good amount of stars, it has a good amount of forks. So this tells us that it's a widely used action. We also know that it was last updated 5 days ago. So it gives us an idea that it's maintained and it's used and it's not something that may be stale. So it's a good action to use. And if you come down to the README, you can see that it does exactly what we want it to do, which is add a comment to a pull request. So then we don't have to write our own code to make a comment on a pull request. We can just utilize this GitHub action that's open source. So to do that, we can come and look at this README and it tells us add a comment to an issue or pull request. And essentially it describes how you do that. And this here is a step. And we're essentially going to copy and paste this. The uses part, we're going to take that first, bring it over. And so what this here does, so previously we had said run and we had ran bash code directly in the Ubuntu machine we were using and simply said echo hello world. Here we're not using bash, we're calling on an action that has already some predefined code. And to do that, you use the uses keyword and you reference the action. We're referencing version 4 because that is the latest version. Usually the README gives you what the latest version is in the examples, but you could always verify that by going to the releases and just making sure that is the latest version. And usually you want to use the latest version unless you have a reason to use a previous version. The latest version is what's safe to go with. The next part to it is any custom action usually has some inputs you pass to it. We're essentially going to do what is described here with the difference that we're not going to have any reaction. So we're going to have the issue number, which is going to tell the action what pull request to comment on, and the body, which is going to tell the action what to comment on the pull request. And usually in the README, you'll also find a description of the inputs. So the two inputs we're going to use are the body, which is one of them, and it tells you here the common body, which is what you're going to comment. And then the other part is the issue number, which is the number of the issue or the pull request wish to create a comment. So that gives you more information. So let's come back up here and let's do exactly what it says here. Let's go back to our action. So whenever we're going to put inputs, we use the with keyword. And then we have our two inputs. We have issue number and we have our body. Okay, so for the issue number, really what it wants is just wants the number of the pull requests. And we want this to comment on the pull request that is currently running the workflow. And so we can utilize something that GitHub Actions framework gives us. It allows us to obtain a bunch of information from the current event that trigger the workflow. And so whenever a pull request event happens, we can actually grab the number of that pull request. Because it's a pull request event, the framework allows us to grab the pull request that triggered this workflow. And so the way to do that is we open up curly brackets and then we say GitHub event dot pull request dot number. Okay, so what will happen here is whenever there's a pull request event, we'll have access to that pull request number that triggered that pull request event. Now, if you hardcode 2, 3, then it won't work for any pull request, but this way it will work for any pull request that triggers this workflow. So that would be that part. And then the next part of that is the body. So the body is really what's going to get commented on the pull request. We could just put hello world. But what I want to do here to further illustrate this framework that GitHub Actions provide for us is I want to grab an output from the previous step and use that to make the body. So the way to do that is we're going to assume that we already did the work to create a step output in this step, and we're just going to grab that step output and put it here. So once again, we can add this pipe so we can have multi-line, and then we open up the curly brackets again. And then this time we say steps because we're grabbing the previous step. The step we're going to grab, which is going to be the hello world step. And then we want the outputs of that step. And then we want which output we want. And we're going to say value because we're going to give the output, we're going to grab the keyword value. Okay, so once we have that, if this output that the step created is hello world, it'll comment hello world. That's the body. But to do that, we do need to update our previous step to create a step output. So previously we just had the echo hello world, which just printed the console hello world. Now we're going to expand this. Let's pipe it so we can do multi-line. We're going to keep the echo hello world because that's still valid. And then we're going to create an output. So first thing is we're just going to create a batch variable called hello world. And this is just going to hold the hello world string. And then here we create our output. So we say echo, we open up the string, we then give the keyword of what the output will be referenced as. We referenced it as value. So we say value. And then we say what that value equals. In this case, it's this variable. So we just reference that variable in bash. And then we pipe that to the GitHub outputs environment variable. So we just say GitHub output. And so now we're essentially saying, okay, create an output with the keyword value that has this value, which is hello world, and put that in the output so that we can grab this in a following step. And now the other part to this is that we are referencing the step, and this reference does not reference this name. We actually need to provide the reference in an ID keyword, which is an optional, but needed if you're going to be referencing a step and another step. So we called it hello world, so we're going to keep the name of the ID the same. You could name this whatever you want. You just have to make sure you update this part to the same name. These have to match. And that's it. So now what we have is we have a step that comments on a PR. It utilizes the GitHub pull request event to grab the PR number. And then it grabs an output from previous step to comment hello world, and it places that in the body. So let's test that out. To test this out, let's commit and push. So comment on PR, commit and push. And then let's head back over to the GitHub GUI to make sure this works. All right, so we create the pull request. We can keep the title the same as our commit description. Okay, so if we recall, we have the trigger saying trigger anytime we create a pull request or push to a pull request against the main branch. And this pull request is against the main branch. So this should have already triggered. So if we go over here to the actions, we should see that this should have ran. And here's what I was saying before. We make sure to change the name to hello world common PR to make sure we know which one it is. And indeed it is this one, but it failed. So let's open this up and see what happened. So if we open up this workflow, we can see that we have our first step, which is the hello world step, which does the echoing to the console hello world, as we had seen in the previous example. We could also see the code here, which was all the output logic we put in to place this in a step output. That seemed to all have worked fine, as far as we know. We didn't verify because this didn't work, but let's see what happened here. Comment on PR, we're saying that there was a request there, and it's saying resources not accessible by integration, and it's given us a 403. So essentially permissions denied. And the reason for this is because all GitHub Actions workflows have by default a GitHub token, permissions token, but that token has only read access. And because we were trying to comment on the PR, it is unable to because that token only has read access. So we need to go back to our workflow and update our workflow and give the workflow pull request write access so that it doesn't fail with access denied. So let's head back over to the web editor and let's give those permissions to our workflow. I'm gonna open this in a new tab. Okay, once this opens up, we need to make sure we're on the branch we were working on, which was the Hello World comment PR. Let's switch to that branch. Once we're here, we're in our workflow. And so what we need to do is we need to say, give this workflow the permissions to write on a PR. So the way we do that is we add a permissions keyword. There are numerous permissions that you could add here. We're going to cover this in more detail in later videos, but what we want here is just the pull request write permission. So we just say pull request and then write. So this should give our workflow the permissions to write to a pull request. Once we've done that, we just need to commit and test. So let's come back up here and say give workflow PR write permissions. We commit and push, and then this should trigger right away again because we just pushed to a pull request that's against the main branch. And so we go back to actions here, filter by our workflow, and it's running. So let's open that up, and it succeeded. And so we had our first step, which is the hello world step, which just echoes hello world, then creates the output for the other step to use. And from the looks of it, it worked. And so we want to verify that by going back to our pull request, and we should see a comment on that. And yep, there you have it. We have hello world comment. And you can see that the other action from our previous example is also running, and it seems that it's stuck on the queue. And what that means is essentially that it hasn't found a runner to run on, which we'll talk about later. And so it took a little bit to find that runner, but eventually it ran. So we will talk a little more about what that means in a later video. There is one more thing I want to cover with this current example. And so we're going to go back to the workflow here. And so previously I had mentioned how this here utilizes a pull request event to grab the pull request number. And so that works great whenever the trigger of the event is a pull request. If the trigger of the event was a push event, this won't work because the event pull request won't exist. And there's really not a pull request number anymore because it's a push directly to main. So it doesn't really have a reference. So there's no way to really grab a PR number. But really, it doesn't really make sense to put a comment on a PR whenever it's a push event because there's no pull request to put a comment on. So what we want to do is we want to make sure this step does not run unless it's a pull request. And we could do that by putting a condition. This is also part of the framework aspect. We can use conditions to run certain parts of the workflow and skip others. And that's what we do here. We put an if statement. We open up the curly brackets once again. And then we say GitHub event name. And we say if this event name is equal to pull request, then we run this step. And if not, then it won't run because we don't need it to run if it's an event to push to the main branch. And so we're going to commit this and verify that this actually works. So back here, say only run comment on your event. Commit and push. We can come back here. This will trigger again, and it should make another comment because it's still a pull request. So let's watch that run again. It's done. So let's come back here. It should have added another comment. And now when we merge, it's going to be a push event to the main branch. And in that run, it should not try to run the second step. So let's verify that actually worked. Let's merge, delete this branch, and let's come here to the actions. Let's filter by this workflow. This one is a push to the main branch. So let's open that up. And it's done running. And as you can see, the first step, the hello world, which
runs the echo hello world and sets up the output, runs successfully, but then comment on PR was skipped. And this is because this was a push event and not a pull request event. And that's it. So we have expanded on the hello world example to comment on a PR. And in the process, we have demonstrated the power of the GitHub Actions framework. We have seen that we can utilize a variety of variables given to us as we did to obtain the pull request number. We also used it to ensure we didn't run a given step whenever it wasn't a pull request because it didn't make sense to do so. And we utilized this rich GitHub GUI to troubleshoot our action when we had the permissions issue. And then we had the community action and that we used to comment on the PR. And that way we did not have to write our own code to use the GitHub API and comment on the PR. In the next video, we will move on to chapter 1, section 2, where we will talk about syntax and terminology and get a little more into the details of the building blocks of GitHub action workflows. And a lot of what I glanced over fairly quickly here will start to make more sense. So I will see you in that video. See you then.